Dressed in battle kit and steel helmets reminiscent of another, sinister age, these men are part of the well-equipped security apparatus which keeps one man in total command of a nation of 33 million people. The country is Spain. It's among people like these the seeds of opposition are nurtured and in the past few years have ripened. What future is there for this country?
1st of October was horrendous and goes against human rights, I would say. The reaction in Catalonia, of course, was of really fear in some ways, completely abandoned by the international opinion in so many ways. Divided the society, and the coexistence has been divided in two, basically. I know there are families divided, or families that they do not talk about this anymore. After years of negotiations and having some kind of one of the most advanced autonomies in the world. And one of the things that is very sad is that it's 40 years ago that we recover the self-government. And now is the 40th anniversary, and the government has been intervened by the government. They passed a law for independence that was not clear, and so many people criticized it because it was not fully democratic. There have been so many mistakes in all sides. But in a way, it's interesting that this peaceful element is still on both sides. Little by little, I think in my view, all these kind of fractures could heal, I think, I hope.
These people regard themselves as separate from Spaniards. Last year, their demands for autonomy led to civil violence.
Catalonia, the movement towards some autonomic movement, some kind of an autonomous freedom, regional freedom, started with the collapse of the Spanish Empire, basically because the bourgeois lost the markets in Cuba, mostly, in Cuba and the Philippines. Not independent. Independence is something that came way later. But this nationalistic movement started at the turn of the 19th century, the beginning of the 19th century. Of course, if the government, central government, is not able to manage our interests abroad, okay, let's start to try to manage them ourselves. But yeah, we have a culture, we have a literature, we have a language. But Catalonia always was inserted in that state since 1492, in which it was the union of the two crowns, basically Castile and Aragon, right? Ever since has been part of Spain. Of course, always trying to defend our own identity and, in economic terms, our own interests, especially the ruling classes or the elites. Basically, because the Catalan bourgeois supported the language, which was not the case in Valencia, was not the case in the Balearic Islands, and was not the case in the Basque Country, right? Because those were language of the peasants. While the Catalan bourgeois, not the high bourgeois react like any other and deserted the language, but you know, the middle class and the bourgeois, yes, they were very supportive of the language, which is a very unique case in some ways. I think the independent movement started with the crisis. I mean, the real push. I mean, it's always been there, but the real push, and also it grew so much with this kind of the crisis that started, and then perhaps the central government was blamed for that. I'm not saying that it shouldn't be blamed, but in many ways, I think this discontent grew at the time. The problem is that now, after years of negotiations and having some kind of one of the most advanced autonomies in the world, and one of the things that is very sad is that it's 40 years ago that we recover the self-government through Josep Tarradellas, who was in exile. It was 1977 when he returned. I was very young, but I remember going to the demonstrations, right? And now is the 40th anniversary, and the Generalitat, the government, has been intervened by the government. They passed a law for independence that was not clear, and so many people criticized it. But in a way, it's interesting that this peaceful element still, especially on both sides. For me, as a work as a critic in literature and history and these things, and all these subjects, for me the independent movement now is kind of really, really hard to understand. What's the independentist Catalan exactly how it is? Usually it's well educated, yeah, I agree on that front, young, and at times not part of the working force. But in my mind I see some kind of young, perhaps students supported the independence, and also they were kind of not exactly very happy when Puigdemont declared independence, but then it was not declared. The younger are more in favor of the independence. Under 55 are more supportive of independence. Then the support for independence after 56 decreases and decreases and decreases. Why? People are worried about their pensions. What's going to happen with the pensions? So in some ways I see this. Also, what I would say, the support for independence comes from the countryside. Probably here as well, I've seen that in Scotland. The Scottish movement is more working class, and in a way they're taking away the strength of labor in so many ways. Catalonia probably is the middle class. And why the middle class? I've read some studies or articles that say that the people with higher income are more in favor of the independence. I see why. I mean, if you don't have a job, you're more scared of independence, because then we enter in no man's land. Talking about the elites, probably not. Probably not. I mean, yeah, the history of nationalism, Catalan nationalism, is connected with the bourgeois. Because, I mean, why we speak Catalan and other regions don't? Basically, because the Catalan bourgeois supported the language, which was not the case in Valencia, was not the case in the Balearic Islands, and was not the case in the Basque Country. So I don't see what I always saw behind the nationalistic movement. So that's why I'm a bit puzzled right now. Really puzzled. In many ways, I see a divided society. In many, many ways. I know there are families divided, or families that they do not talk about this anymore, I know people who have these WhatsApp groups that decided, okay, let's not talk about this anymore. Let's talk about hunting, right? So that's something that was not expected by the Catalan government, and I think there they made a big, big mistake. Catalans always we've been peaceful people. There's two sides, the seny, so the thinking, or the rauxa, which is the rage. The problem is that now the rage seems to be imposing in the nationalistic movement. One of the models in the Catalan independent movement is Gandhi, something that still speaks very highly of Catalonia in spite of the whole mess and all the mistakes made by the central government and all the mistakes made by the regional or Catalan government. I think the mistake is to ask for a referendum in the way it was asked. For me, that's the mistake. Catalan government is formed by three parties, which is, I'll call it Convergència, now it's got another name, which is the moderate, kind of the bourgeois. Esquerra Republicana, which has been historical party, even during the Second Republic, 1930, was the main party in Catalonia. And then the CUP. These three parties have completely different ideas of Catalonia. And one of the things that I see problematic is that that was pushed by the smallest group, that is CUP. Why? Because they only have 8% of the votes. But they were needed to have the coalition in power. So, of course, here we have clearly imbalances. And one of the first things that the CUP wanted is that the main leader from Convergència, the one with more votes, Artur Mas, so they said he must be out because of the budget cuts. Mas couldn't be the president, so then he appointed this guy who was the mayor of Girona. He had some kind of an independentist kind of profile. And he was appointed like that. No one expected him. Oh, who's Puigdemont? Oh, he was the mayor of Girona. Oh, right, oh, really? But he was imposed in a way to create this coalition. I heard from so many people complaining about laws that are not being passed as being one of the laziest parliaments in the history of Catalonia because they were only focused on the independence. I have many friends in Catalonia who say that we have other problems and the independence is not going to be the solution to all of this. And they say first there's education, first budget cuts, and all times the budget cuts come from the Catalan government. But of course, the Catalan government projected into Madrid all these problems. Madrid as a central government place. I mean, not blaming the Madridians, because also they have to suffer from the different decisions taken there, right? So in a way, it's a big turmoil, and I think it was pushed too early and without a plan. No one, not even the main leader, have an idea what's going to be the day after. And for me, that's one of the problems. And also not taking into account that somebody's going to say no. So for me, it's been that the problem. That was criticized by a singer like Joan Manuel Serrat, who said, no, this referendum, sorry, it cannot work this way. Then he was attacked, he was a fascist. And sorry, I mean, it's somebody who really fought in the anti-Franco movement. So he deserves some respect, even though you disagree. Okay, fine. But that's one of the elements that I do not share with the independent movement in some ways.
Però què fills de puta que arribeu a ser? Para!
1st of October was horrendous and goes against human rights, I would say, but well, the way police act all over the world, so that's something we have to revise worldwide. But it's not acceptable. So this peaceful kind of demonstration, I think, is something that still speaks very highly of Catalonia. The reaction in Catalonia, of course, was of really fear in some ways, completely abandoned by the international opinion in so many ways. We, as Catalans, were entitled to a referendum. I completely disagree with the central government. I think we're entitled to a referendum, and perhaps if the referendum had taken place 4 or 5 years before, or 3 years before, Spain wouldn't have the problems that they have now. That's an opinion. The King of Spain made one of the most terrible mistakes he could have done. I understand he was in support of the statu quo, or the state, how it is, and you're breaking the rules. Fine, I agree on that. But he never had a sentence for the people who were beaten. And that, for me, I was talking to my mom over the phone, and we said, God, if you compare it to his dad, oh my God, his dad was way more intelligent. He was kind of a ruffian, fine, but the guy really knew, say that word in Catalan. I mean, when no one knew in the beginning of the transition in the 1975, he went to Catalonia and spoke a couple of sentences in Catalan, right? So everybody was happy with Juan Carlos. I think Felipe, another one who's not been at the level required. As well as Rajoy. I mean, one of the problems with the central government is that they haven't no action as brothers to this kind of, they call a crash of trains, frontal crash of trains. And I think the no action has been one of the problems from the central government. They should have listened, and they should have perhaps say no, but listen first. And they never did that. So that's why we ended up in this situation. None of the politicians is at the level right now.
It was a brave move, and many of these men are now serving long prison sentences. It does take brave men and women to make any kind of civil protest in Spain, but the shock of the uprising did rumble throughout the country.
Sisplau, us demanem dues coses.
Puigdemont, for me, is a completely unknown character. For me, doesn't have the political height of Tarradellas or even Pujol. Puigdemont, after all, was appointed in a very funny way. He had some kind of an independentist kind of profile. I heard so many criticisms in Girona because he was so interested in the Catalan parliament before, as being part of the council, that he was never there. That's what I heard on the streets of Girona. I'm reading a novel called Taxi by Carlos Zanon, and in one moment says, he's more difficult to grasp what he's going to do than Carles Puigdemont, the president of Catalonia. I said, God, Carlos, I think you were right at the time. No one knows what he's going to do. But Puigdemont, what I read about him, he pays the fees to be part of Convergència, or PDeCAT, I think is the name, to be a member of PDeCAT, thinks like Esquerra Republicana, and reacts like CUP, right? Like the most radicals. So I don't think he has the height, the political height for the moment. But that's my impression. For me, the situation is very, very difficult, puzzle, and unpleasant as well, very unpleasant. There was a moment in which the Catalan government had the upper hand. It was around the 20th of October, I would say, in which Puigdemont could have said, okay, let's have elections. That was mediated by Urkullu, by the leader in the Basque Country. He mediated, and even they had some kind of a deal with Madrid, no matter what the newspaper said. They had a deal in which, okay, you proclaim independence, but you said it's not really independence. So we're going to say, okay, we have the Article 155, but not going to implement it. Let's have elections here. At that moment, I think that was the wisest movement possible, right? So the autonomy is not intervened, and they have fresh, new elections. Because after all, the government in Catalonia has arrived to this dead point in which it was going to move forward. Then is when Puigdemont should have went ahead and go for those elections. That would have been way easier. But what happened? That's the problem. People on the streets were telling him that he was a traitor. Then Puigdemont went ahead again, doing the same thing they did on 6 or 7 of September, proclaiming the independence of Catalonia, with a big call towards Europe, right? The thing, a friend of mine who's a lawyer said, but that was very strange. One, there were no celebrations, and they were voting and decided. It was a very strange kind of vote because it was secret, which is kind of unusual in the Catalan parliament, usually, unless it's requested long before. And the Spanish flag was still there. So it was an independence that, in a way, was light, very light independence express. Then the president goes to Brussels, many jokes about Tintin and Milou and a box of chocolates, which was kind of ridiculous. Now we have, according to Sergi Pàmies, whose family, he grew up in exile, says this president is not exile. This is Instagram exile, basically, because what he's doing is not normal. You have your parties going into elections and you're exiled. Well, what a joke is this? So then now it's in total turmoil. I think Puigdemont had a moment in which he could have made history, and he lost it.
Normalidad, para la tranquilidad, en favor de la democracia, para consolidar la situación económica. Por ello el voto al PP es el voto verdadero.
Now we're going to see the other side of the problem. There's a concept of the Spanish nationalism. In the case of Spain, there's a very kind of centralized unity of Spain, united in religion, in history, and just the Catalans are a pain in the neck, like the Basques, right? More problematic than Canarias. This concept of this united Spain, united since the empire, and that stupidity, that kind of Spanish nationalism is very dangerous as well. He alienates with this kind of conception of Spain. The Spanish Constitution in 1978 was written mostly by two Catalans. It was Roca Junyent and Soletura. One in the Communist Party at the time, PSUC, the Catalan section, and the other one is in the Convergència. They say in a way in the Constitution that Spain is a nation of nations. How that went through at that moment, that was heroic and that was very, very smart. But of course, later on in the next article says it is unidad indivisible. Spain is a unity, it cannot be divided. Here we have two different conceptions. The Catalans are here to destroy our unity, or the invasive Castilians, even though Castilians, poor Castilians, have not much to do in here, right? But yeah, that's the two kind of conceptions. For me, the problem in Catalonia, in Spain, right now, is that they're in a ladder. The two politicians, Puigdemont and Rajoy, just to give an example, they should go down a couple of rungs and then talk. I think that would be much better for everybody else. Because this situation is not good for the people.
One thing is certain. It will not be possible to quench the spirit of the proud Spaniards forever. And Juan Carlos would be a wise king if he were to recognize the forceful character of his people and the tempo of their ultimate desire for greater liberty.
In some ways, Catalonia has moved back years and years in the economic well-being. What is the foreign investor coming? The tourists are going down, it's at 20% less. The fact that a bank like Caixa has moved out, that's very, very worrying, because these banks were connected with some kind of social investment. That's why they're called caixas instead of banks. Now it's Caixa Bank, but in the old times, it's how they were. There were some kind of societies in which they made less profit, but they invest on people, right? It's historically has been functioning very, very well, except Caixa de Catalonia, who collapsed. But Caixa has been a very strong bank. Now it's gone. They're going to come back. The problem is the international investment. The international investment going to be, I mean, nothing is more scary than $1 million, right? No one can have more scare in his being than $1 million. An economist told me that, and it's true. I mean, if there are problems here, I'll move my money somewhere else. I'm going to make less, fine, but I'm not going to lose them. So I understand politics works like that. I mean, Nicola Sturgeon is not going to say what Theresa May says. Would be a big mistake on both sides, you know. Something will be in the wrong way. But in a way, there's not this confrontational. There's not this kind of the Castilians are invading our territory. Catalonia benefited from the Spain in many ways, different times in history. Participate in the creation of a new Spain, of course. Spain has to work on the Constitution. Constitution was written in a time with a lot of pressure after the death of Franco, with the army controlling the country. And those guys that I mentioned, Soletura and Roca Junyent, God, they were very smart with the Constitution we had. And also, there was a transition to democracy. That was not easy. You know, that was not easy because the far right killed people. ETA emerged as, hard times, los años de plomo, the years of the bullets, after all. But try to listen from the central government and try to be more realistic from the Catalan government. That's what I think. Let's see what happens in these elections. Probably the same result. But I think that they should talk and work together more than this confrontational. In my view, all these kind of fractures will heal, I think, I hope.